Alright, so in the last video we set this up, and in this video we're going to be having a script do that for us. So just to take a look at all the components in it again, we've got a text child, which we're going to be using this function to make. We've also got the empty container child, which we're going to be using this to make. This just makes an empty rect transform, and it sets the local scale and local position inside the parent. This one here uses that to create a text, and then it sets the text, the color, the alignment, it scales it to 0 and then stretches it out so that it fits inside its parent. And then we've got new button, which we're going to be using for all the children and for the main button. It takes in a name, text, and a parent. It uses new UI element to make the rect transform for the button. It adds an image, it adds a button, and then it scales it to a default size of 160 by 30. Then it calls new text to create a text inside the button and sets that text to the text that you pass in. Then it returns the button. So then this is for when we're going to be creating the menu item that makes a new drop-down. So if canvas doesn't exist, this function will go ahead and create one for us. It'll also create an event system if one of those doesn't exist, and then it returns it. So when we go using Unity Editor, and then we can make a menu item, and here we'll say GameObject/UI/dropdown, public static void new dropdown, because a menu item has to have a function right under it that it's meant to call. So in here, when we right click here and go to UI, you'll see dropdown is existing there, but nothing happens because we haven't made anything happen yet. So here we'll say new button, and the name will be dropdown. The text will also be dropped down in this case, and the parent is going to be getCanvas.transform. I'm just going to close that. So now when I click on this, I get a new drop-down. It's got the text inside, though it doesn't have the container. We'll be setting that up separately. We also need to make sure that it's adding a drop-down component. And then we'll make a custom editor for that drop-down component that will set stuff up for us. Now to edit this, I will create a drop-down editor script. Open it up. At the top, I will say using Unity Editor. I will make sure to extend editor instead of mono behavior. You can get rid of all of this. And then we need to define that it's a custom editor of the type dropdown. In the custom editor, I'm going to make a public dropdown current dropdown, and then in void on enable, I'm going to set it equal to the target as dropdown. So the target is the object that's selected, and it's going to be a dropdown since this custom editor specifies that. So we're just going to store that. So then we can override onInspector GUI, and instead of calling this, which actually just displays what you normally see, I'll get rid of that to see what happens. So we'll now say current dropdown.isOpen is equal to editor GUI layout dot. We'll make a toggle, and then the label for it will be isOpen, and then you just say the same thing that you're setting there. So now that should be appearing, but nothing's happening yet. That's because we need to make sure that this is public, and then in the end of this we need to be calling that update function. Something else we need to do is call editor.utility.setDirty and pass in the current dropdown so that Unity knows some values might have been changed and that should be updated, and then also repaint. That just repaints the inspector. So now, okay, so the problem here is that there is no container. So we will make a void verify valid function that will just make sure everything is all set up as we need it. And I'm going to jump into dropdown and so we already have a container, but I do need to make a text main text, and I also need access to the image on this. So I'm just going to say get return get component image. So then back in here, I'll go ahead and see if current dropdown.image is equal to null. Well, that's simple. We just need to add an image. And so I need to right click on that and resolve it. And then, so if current dropdown.container is equal to null, we need to see if the current dropdown.transform.findChild, if a container exists in its children. So if it's null, we're going to need to be creating one. Otherwise, if it does exist in its children, we just set it to find the child container.get component rect transform. So creating the container. So in the first video, we just created an empty game object. So we'll say current dropdown.container is equal to UIUTILITY.new UI element named container, and the parent is the current dropdown.transform. So what else did we do? We also added a vertical layout group. And then we set its width and height to 0, and we stretched its anchors along the bottom. So to do that, I'll call UIUTILITY.scaleRect, pass in the container 0, 0, and then I'm going to set its anchor min equal to 0, 0, and its anchor max equal to 1, 0. So that ensures it's stretching along the bottom. That should be it for the container. Another thing we need to see is if current dropdown.mainText is equal to null. Once again, we'll just see if it exists in the children. And if it doesn't, we'll need to be setting it to UIUTILITY.newText dropdown, and the parent is the current dropdown transform. Else, we just set it to find it in the children. Okay. So now I'm going to call this at the very beginning of the onInspector GUI, just to make sure everything's good. Alright, so the text is created, the container is created, that is all good and dandy, but it doesn't have any children yet. So we'll do that in the next video. For now, let's just keep adding some customization here. So we're going to set up the text that's displayed, or a way to change the text that's displayed on the button. So current dropdown.mainText.text is equal to, once again, editor GUI layout.text field, main text, and then current dropdown.mainText.text. Menu. Drop-down menu. So let's set up some more. How about the font dot main text dot font is equal to editor GUI layout. So since there isn't like a font field or anything, we have to call object field. The object we're setting, actually first we can always do the label. The object we're setting is the main text dot font. The type is font, and then the one we're using is this one. So allow scene objects is allowing assigning scene objects. Let's say false, because we're assuming we're dragging it in from the the assets here. Also, you have to remember to cast it, and I'm going to set the label to font. Now I'm going to set the font size as well as the color. So I'm going to separate this up a little. So now I'll set the, add another space and set the image sprite. This is displaying like that because the type is set to simple. So I'm going to create something to edit that. So then we can change that to sliced and it'll look normal. And then current dropdown dot image dot color is equal to. Alright, so that's it for now. In the next video we will start adding children and customizing them and looking at being able to remove them individually.